Yeah. Hi, g'day everyone. Welcome back, of course, to the Time Bomb channel. I hope all is good in your part of the world, and we've got something quite different for the channel today. Meeting up here in Chez Bombardier with a UK micro brand called Helicon watches. They very kindly come to visit, and we're meeting Jonathan, head of the brand, and he's going to be talking to us a little bit about the watches and their company. So yeah, fantastic. So Jonathan, good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the show, and thank you for having us. Fantastic hospitality we've had for you in Chez Bombardier.
You're the first watch brand here is potentially the last, depending on how that lunch went. So no, fantastic. Thanks very much indeed for sparing the time to come to talk to me. For those on the channel, I met Jonathan at the Watch fair a couple of months back, and we've been talking since. I was very excited to see again some of his watches after that show, because you have a look at things on a watch show and then you lose perception. So it's good to touch base again. So first question for you, Jonathan, is a little bit around the brand itself. You've chosen Helicon. There is another brand, I think, out of Poland, spelt with a K, that make military style kit. So where did the brand name come from?
Well, I mean, literally, we were searching around for names, and I don't know where Helicon came into my head. It sounded one of those Greek names that sounds very Old English, if that makes sense. And I think I did look it up, and I think it was I think it's either a mountain in Greece, or it's the son of one of the gods, with some nefarious ending that as a parable in terms of what you shouldn't do in your life. But then, but the two things happened. Actually, the name sounded good.
Yes.
It was the right size graphically. And then Danielle, my partner, and my wife, who's with us in the room but likes to be off camera, actually designed the logo. And the logo, I think we call it an ambigram, which means you can turn it either way up and it looks the same. And it just all seemed to click together. It was only once we'd registered the name that we actually realised there is a Helicon, or there was a Helicon watch company. Occasionally watches pop up on eBay, but we know nothing about it. I mean, that was literally an afterthought. And usually, as in the history of these brands, it probably was an offshoot of some importer in Europe who probably made their own watches or rebadged Swiss watches under their name of Helicon. So it literally was out of thin air, but we quite liked the sound. We quite liked the sort of third history. And we quite like the look of the logo. That's how it came, really. That's an honest answer.
Outstanding, thank you. And obviously, sort of reading through your website and in conversation with you, I understand you've got quite a long history of working, in the watch industry. Is there anything that you can share with us today about that background?
Yeah, I mean, just to give you an idea, my grandfather was a watchmaker, and I'm talking about the sort of 80s. So when I came home from school on the bus, I used to go back to my grandfather's house. And my grandmother would make me bread and butter, and I'd wait for my parents to finish work and collect me. But it was literally sitting at his workbench. But you've got to remember, this was the time in the 80s when automatic mechanical watches were on the wane. I think we'd just gone through the phase of remember the red LED digital watches?
Yes.
You used to press the button to tell the time.
Yes, indeed.
So it was, I would say, at that time, perceived to be a dying art. No one wanted it. So I watched him in his workshop, and I was just surrounded by all these pieces. But to go into the watch industry career was never being spoken of. I left school at 16 quite early, and actually my first job was an apprentice luthier, so I made guitars or worked for someone who made guitars. But once again, pre-internet days, that wasn't really a career choice. So my career delved me into very different things. But when I had a business and we exited that business, we had some time, Danielle, my wife, and I, to look at what we loved. We both loved watches, I would say, passionately from the early 2000s. And we were fortunate enough to buy or impulse buy watches that we liked the look of, and we weren't really into big brands, so we'd always come back from holidays with some brands that no one would ever hear of.
Nice.
So it was a case of, we saw watches. I remember we once went, I think we were in Las Vegas for some celebration, and we went to a store and we bought, Danielle saw some Zodiacs, and this is pre the Zodiac reinvention we have now. And I think she was so excited that we bought all the Zodiacs. We bought every single colour. And they weren't expensive watches. I think they were a few dollars or maybe $100 each, but she was so excited. And I think from that, we started thinking about watches and the watches that we liked and why you couldn't buy them in the UK. And then really almost pre-online sales days immersed ourselves in the industry. That's how it all started. But literally getting in a car, driving around Europe and knocking on watchmakers' doors. I mean, that's how it all started, really.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. So as a hobbyist, I know very little about the watch industry. I know that I've often toyed with the idea of creating my own brand, and I think I've been quite terrified by the prospect of not even knowing where to begin with it, because it's such a vast and unknown entity. Would you have any advice from that experience about the watch industry? What's your view of it? I mean, obviously you've seen a lot of changes in the watch industry over the last couple of years.
Well, I mean, to this day, both Dan and I act as consultants for other brands as well.
Yep.
So we are involved in other brands as well. And that really is something that we enjoy doing because we see so much. I think the first thing I'd say to people is that the industry is actually quite small.
Yeah.
So even when I go to manufacturers in Germany or Switzerland that are quite well-known names, you'd be surprised how small they are.
Okay.
So there is no such thing as a warehouse with automation and machines, and everything is handmade. We are a handmade industry to a degree. So first of all, I would recognise that the industry is quite small, and that means that the challenges of sourcing components, movements, and everything are quite tough, because you only need someone who is a degree or so bigger than you, and they will be pushed up the pecking order when you're ordering 2,500 cases, or 5,000 cases, or 5,000 movements. You're not going to be very high up in the pecking order.
Yeah.
So I would say to people, just be realistic about what you can achieve, and it's going to take you a lot of time and effort just to even acquire the materials you need to manufacture.
Okay.
So I think that's what I would say. But it's, as in every industry, there are no barriers to entry except perhaps time and money, and that's life, really, isn't it?
Same in
and I
many
think,
industries.
and I think one thing I would say, and we would talk about it quite often, the sort of little community we have in the industry, certainly in the UK, which you saw when you came to the Watches Fair, was, you forget how many brands have gone by the wayside.
Yes.
We remember who's here, but you forget how many brands started and lasted 18 months because they really couldn't achieve the scale or the production or set up their network to do what they needed to do. So I think the more the merrier, but I think just be wary that this is, we are not going to retire from Helicon to the Caribbean island, surely. We do this because we love it.
Yeah.
This is a passion for us. As a husband and wife team, it has its challenges, which I'm sure Daniel off camera will voice. But I think just be prepared that this is not instant success. It takes, well, in our case, 20 years of knowledge to get to this point.
Wow, superb. Thank you. And then obviously with your watches at the moment, you're issuing them in 50 watches per colour. I imagine you potentially alluded to some of the reasons for doing that with regards to availability and things like this. I mean, I guess it might be quite challenging in that sense as well, sort of designing a watch whereby you're very much sticking to your guns here. You've chosen your colours, you've chosen these things. But I guess that might be a challenge then also selling it, because a lot of people like slightly more generic. I think there's a market, isn't there, for those who want something unique and bespoke and those who want something generic. I guess when you're creating your brand and you're creating your watch designs, how much does that influence your decision-making process?
I think to a degree. I mean, the first thing I'll have to admit, as I said, is we work with other brands, so we very much can piggyback. If I'm ordering 2,500 watches for one brand or something, or involved with those projects, we have a little black book of contacts that we know who to speak to for bezel inserts, for cases, for crowns, even movements. I mean, we are direct customers of Seika, so we can talk to them directly, so our movements are fresh. So I think, the first thing is we wanted to make the brand limited because we felt we wanted to be at an affordable level but give something back to the collector. In other words, firstly, we wanted to have added value by saying, well, we make 50 pieces in this run, that's it, we're done. But also because we've got so many ideas in our book, that we wanted to have a story where there was a beginning, middle, and definitely an end. This is not one of those series where it's Series 8.
Or version 8 of that first watch.
So we wanted to add value at an affordable level by saying we're limited, and you've got one, and our return to you is not we're making Mark II next year. It's we've done it, we've finished it, and we move on to a totally different project. But also it was, as I said, this is our passion. So we wanted to have something that kept us fulfilled for the next few years in terms of, keeping us interested. But the economies of scale aren't there. I mean, to be quite open. I mean, it doesn't work well like this, but we're lucky that, I'm literally all the time talking to other brands about work. and I can pick up the phone and have a chat intimately with a hand manufacturer, straps, all these things. So we can make it work. And we hope we can keep it going in this way.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate. Yeah, exactly the economies of scale where you've got a limited run of watches, even though they are available in a huge. You've got a good swathe of colours that they come in. All right, no, very, very interesting. We touched on the husband and wife team. I think in my own wife and the challenges that we have. My wife and I used to work together, ironically. So it seems that we don't always learn from our experiences. Do you have defined roles within your company when it comes to the design of your watches, or the putting together, or the marketing, sales?
I mean, there's very defined roles. First of all, I will say Danielle was pitching for a client the other week, and they said, "What's the greatest achievement?" And she actually said, "Working with my husband." And I actually like that answer. I would say we do have very clear roles. In the design process, I'll give Danielle all the credit. I mean, she has trained a designer for many, many years, and really thrives on the design process. So I think what we do is we start with a brief or an idea.
Yep.
We literally have that sort of mood board, that sketch board that gets ideas put up. And then I hand it across to her, and I remain entirely quiet. Okay. Because I think, first of all, is that, this project started in 2018. Yep. So we're not rushing at anything. But I think she always, first of all, she began her career literally with pen and paper and scalpel, went on to the first Macs, and now she's very adept at working her way around various software packages. Okay. But no, there's the brief, we talk about the brief, and then I leave her to it. And at certain points when I'm allowed, and I mean that seriously, I've got to leave her space. Yes. We then have a sort of meeting and say, where are we? What do you think? And actually, I find that the design process is quite actually peaceful, because what we do is we end up at a point where we both say, that's it. Yeah. So it works. Yeah. But it does remain that I do all the sort of marketing and content side and the strategy, and she very much does everything to do with digital, web, even shipping out the orders. We do everything ourselves. So, anything peaceful and electronic, she's great with, and anything that needs communication stuff, hence why she's here off camera, she's happy for me to do. So I think defining the roles works very well, and it works well for us.
I'll take that advice. Okay. I know when we were just having lunch, we were talking a little bit about history of watches, and I often think, and people often ask me, why are you so obsessed with watches? And I think back to my childhood, and I remember sitting there looking through the Argos catalogue, pointing at watches, and forcing my mother to order them for me. I also remember when I was very young, my brother coming back from the army once, and he was wearing one of the first Citizen Aqualands, and I'd never seen a watch like it before in my life. And I bought one of the newer versions because I just know that it was one of those pivotal moments in my mental disease around wristwatches that sort of pushed me over the edge. Was there a watch perhaps when you were younger that sort of stuck in your head, and it's the one that got you into watches, or was your journey different?
I think there's always a point, and I always say this in a lot of content I do for various things that I present and talk about. I think a watch is a much more significant thing than people acknowledge. So I think, first of all, especially when you're younger, when you're given the gift of a watch, you remember who it was, who gave it, remember the time, everything about it's significant. And I think there's two reasons. First of all, I think you wear a watch on your wrist. First of all, that's a very sensitive part of your body. You're wearing it next to your vein. If I came and grasped you by the wrist, it's very sensitive, that's a very personal movement. The second thing is you're given something of real value. When you're, as I was, early teens, and someone gives you a watch, which was a Seiko Sports 100, that was a big deal to me. My grandmother bought it for me. I've still got it. It still works. I've done a video on my YouTube channel about this 1980 Seiko that still works. There's a huge amount of meaning, but I also think when you're given a watch, there's no excuses. You've got the time on your wrist. You can't be late. You can't say, I didn't know, I wasn't sure. You're really being given, something with practical merit, real value, and something personal. So I think when we talk about ourselves as watch geeks, I think that's a little bit unfair. I think it's a serious gift that I think has everyday use. And I also think, you think about the watches that you wear on your wrist, if you think about the adventures, there's no pair of trainers, sweatshirt, trousers that have been around, probably around as along as that first watch. So think about the holidays, the relationships, the seminal moments in your life. I think watches are all part of that. So I think that what's happened is watches having a watch is not unusual. Being an enthusiast is something that's just blossoming and blossoming. And I think when we started in this seriously as a profession in 2007, watch geeks were very rare. I mean, you would talk, there was, I mean, Hodinkee was just starting, the big platform was just starting. There were very few YouTube channels.
Yep.
There were certainly no shows for watches except trade shows. So I think actually what's happened is the passion and enthusiasm have broadened. And once you learn about design, manufacturing, history, legacy, I think then suddenly it blossoms out like many other hobbies. So I think that's what's happening. So I think forgive yourself for your watch passion. I think it's a worthy hobby to be involved with.
Okay. And looking at watches that are available on the market at the moment, I mean, I often look at the Blancpain 50 Fathoms as I don't know if it's the word, the grail watch, but it's certainly one of the watches that I covet and would desperately like to own. I think I'd like to own one of those more than a Submariner, perhaps. When you look around on what's on offer at the moment, are there any watches that you perhaps might desire to own at some stage in the future, or is your buying situation different?
Yes, I think there are, and I think it's quite simple for me. I always think there's always a watch that just hits you between the eyes, and you go, "That's the one." And I think it's like seeing maybe your partner across the room, and you go, "Oh, I like that person." I think you remember it. I mean, for me, I remember it was at Basel, and I'm trying to remember the year, but I first saw a Hajime Asaoki Tsunami.
Okay.
And I saw that watch, and we were on the stand next door at Basel. I was helping on a stand, and I went back to look at it. And every day I went back to look at it, and it was a fair amount of money. I think it was about 20,000, which I didn't and don't have. But that watch to me was like the pinnacle. There's one other watch, which was the Peter Roberts Concentrique, which I had a chance to buy for not a lot of money. Good one came on the used market about 12 years ago, and know where it is, know has it. And that's Peter Roberts was a very significant watchmaker. His son is making watches, and he made this modification on an old Valjoux movement where we had 5 complications from the center: second time zone, moon phase, chronograph, center stop seconds. I mean, it was a pretty amazing.
Busy movement.
Yeah, and when you think about Peter Roberts being one of the WASDEP instructors and how senior he was, that was a watch that I thought was a real technical achievement. But for me, when that moment hits, I can never tell. And I think that's again the beauty. It's when you have that meal and you go, "Oh, I like that," or you listen to some music and it keeps playing in mind. Once again, it's the beauty of watches. And I always say to people, you can get hung up with the movement and the specification, the dimensions, but I promise you that what you fall in love with will not be meeting all those criteria, because it's just one of those relationships that happen, I think.
Okay, all right. You mentioned Seiko earlier, and it's one of the brands that I think that really got me into watches when I was younger as well. And I think I've expressed in many videos recently how I've been kind of a little frustrated with their recreations, and I'm just desperate for them to do something new. They recently released the combination of the Samurai Shogun, kind of a mashup, and it's still desperately lacking in design creativity. Again, over lunch we talked about the natural evolution of things and changes of things, and you've got a lot of experience obviously in the watch industry. Where do you see the industry heading? Is it a case of it just sort of rehashing designs, or do you think there's hope for us watch nutters that there might be something a little innovative and creative coming down the tubes?
I mean, Seiko's an interesting one, and I've always been passionate about Seiko. My first watch was a Seiko, and I had a very nasty experience, which was the Seiko that I received when I was an early teenager. A friend of mine, my brother's, had the same Seiko and actually got for his 18th birthday a Submariner. He always got the best of the best, really. And I remember him kicking that watch down the drive of his house because he said that was rubbish and he was getting a Submariner. And he was kicking the watch that I coveted.
Yes.
And from that moment, I was sort of like, I don't want to be this sort of person. I want to like what I like. And I think they are a significant manufacturer. I mean, if you look at the history and what they've done. And I always say to people who are sort of apologising for their choice, if you want something where everything's made in-house with a fantastic legacy, well, Seiko ticks all those boxes.
Yep.
And don't underestimate the power of that corporation. But they are huge. I mean, vast. So they are catering for a global market. And I can assure you, knowing the stats that we do from clients we work for, what you think the enthusiast wants is not what the global market wants.
Yes.
So they have to tick it. Saying that, I think the rise of the independent, the micro brand, is pandering to that passion. And I think we cast our way back to, I mean, literally 2017 and 18 when we began this project, there were very few dive watches under 40 millimeters. They were all quite large. They were all quite garish, they're all quite modern, and I think look how it's changed now. However, as I was talking to someone else the other day, quite senior in the industry, I think we are going to see changes.
Yep.
We're working on things for the future that will not be like the Master we're working on now. And I think there are innovations in design and materials, as there always are. So yeah, I'm very positive that we're going to see things. And I think, again, when you see something that comes out and it goes, wow, the only warning is that you're not the only one. And that's why we get these things where people do a drop, as they say, and it's gone. And as small manufacturers, we want to remain small also because we can control it.
Yes.
If demand outstrips supply, we've spoken to brands. I mean, Jonathan at Brew, I saw in New York last October. You know, Laurier, we get a problem. You know, I mean, can't magic 2,500 watches. You know, it's hard.
And the fans and the punters are not generally very forgiving, are they? They can understand it to a point. But I mean, I think if we look at Helm as an equivalent example. You know, they release a limited number of watches because, again, they're a very small company, and people slate them for it. You know, people are not necessarily that forgiving. You know, they say, no, I want to buy your product and I want it now. And, you know, the fact that they can't get it, you know, sort of causes them a little bit of, you know, anti.
I remember being at McDonald's once and someone ordered a burger with some change on it. And they said, that would be 5 minutes. And the guy said, what are you doing, cooking it? I mean, you know, so I think, again, you've got to remember that I mean, I don't know the guys at Helm, but they make some interesting watches and I really like some of them. Just can't magic these things out. So, you know, you have to bear that in mind. But look, isn't it great that you can buy a watch that's relatively affordable, that's different, that's a conversation piece, and actually, you know, the engineering involved is pretty substantial still on a small level. So, I think be a little patient with these guys. You know, it's worth it in the end.
Fantastic. Last question, just before we get on to focus on the watches a little bit more. Then, again, so you put up there's a lot of backstory to your brand.
Yeah.
You're on this current collection, the 62s. I mean, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Do you, for example, see yourself releasing one of these every 2 to 3 years? You know, a range like this, or I mean, obviously without revealing your full business plans.
What can you tell us? The business plan is very simple. I mean, we want to release a new watch every year.
Okay.
They will all be limited runs, and they won't be like we'll bring another one out. So it'll be clean sheet designs. We've designed enough of, well, actually, let me say, Danielle's designed enough watches for different brands around the globe that we've got enough ideas. We've got enough projects that never went anywhere and things that we're passionate about. So I would say there's a 10-year plan, actually. We know exactly what we're going to do for those 10 years. We know what's coming. And actually, sometimes circumstance, so let's just say the next watch is not the one we thought would be next, but circumstances brought it around. And yeah, we know exactly. So the plan in an ideal world, but we want to be really slow about this, is one release a year, limited run. We'll work on that release, and then as that release gets towards the end, the next one will appear. So yeah, there's a 10-year plan. But remember, this is what we want to do. We're not going to retire. You know, we want to do this because we love it, and we want to keep control of all of it. You know, so we've got it, we've finished it, we've got, you know, we've set up a network of service around the world. We want to make sure that we can make our customers happy and get them back for every project every year.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. I think we're going to take a little pause there and then refocus the camera, and we're actually going to get up close and personal with some of the watches we see we've got on the table here. So yeah, just pause 1 second. Okay, so continuation of the video then. We're now looking at the watches. As you can see, there are 50 pieces per colour. We've got the collection here in front of us. Again, just going to ask Jonathan to explain a little bit. A couple of things that I've picked up on, both from pre-looking at the website and also then, you know, in conversation and looking at them here in hand. One of the first things that we can see is that the date wheel is a roulette wheel, in the sense that, you know, we've got black and red letters. Where did that one come from, Jonathan?
Well, I think we always wanted to have a date on the watch. I know there's a lot of no date controversy, but we wanted to make one decision. And actually what happened was two things. First of all, Danielle's, her big pastime, her hobby is calligraphy. So she's always doing different numbers and different writing in ink. And first of all, she came up with a particular set of numerals that we thought looked quite clear without putting a magnifying lens on the dial. And then when we spoke to Seiko and we said, can we put a custom date wheel in, they were all for it, even at a small run. So it was interesting because when we went we did the designs originally, it was they who came back to us with the double digits and said, no, you need to move them slightly close together and enlarge them. And it's interesting how a little touch, the collaboration between us and them, made it much more clear. So it was just a little bit of fun. It's one of those old designs that we really like. It added a bit more detail, and actually the execution was really good. So it worked really well. So just a bit of fun and something that inspires us.
Okay, and then buzzing away inside, you've got the workhorse movement, the NH35, and I read on your website as well that you've got a brass movement holder for that. Can you explain a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so I mean, the NH35 is a great movement, and we've sold literally in our careers, I would say, over 50,000 watches. So we've seen everything from very high-end movements to top-grade movements to Swiss to Japanese. And for this watch, which we want you to wear every day, the NH35 was literally a no-brainer. It's practical, it's tough, it has the magic lever system, which doesn't get talked about enough. You know, 3 pieces where another Swiss brand might use more, and it's reliable. And the other thing is that Seiko, for us, I mean, the guy who runs Seiko operations actually went to college in Durham. He comes to London, we've got a great relationship, and I can pick up the phone and he answers. So many brands have to buy from a wholesaler, we buy direct, and it just was us getting a reliable, workhorse, robust movement that actually I think just works. And we wanted this watch, wear it, enjoy it. Any problems, we can repair the movement, we can swap out the movement, we can get you back enjoying the watch as quickly as possible. So that was the decision. And the movement holder, well, that's a bit of one of those passions of mine. I hate watches with plastic movement holders. They serve no purpose and they look cheap. So even things like shock, they transmit shock to the movement too readily. And it was one of those easy things. We've got a great collaboration with our case maker because the case is a ground up design. We said we want a movement holder that's anti-magnetic, and he literally came and said, I've done this for you. It's brass, it's IPS plated so it doesn't tarnish. It'll give you that sort of protection for the movement because it's not such a hard metal and it has a degree of anti-magnetic. So when you pick up the watches you've just done, there's a nice weight to it.
Yes.
It feels as a quality item, and it was a bit of engineering that we thought was worth putting inside the watch even though you don't see it.
And so they're 38 mils, 38 and a half mils across the dial. Obviously, you've got a little bit of an extension there for your crown. North to south, we're looking at, again, 48 mils, so quite long. But then end links drop inside, again, so that should make it more manageable on wrist. And then deep is 13.1 mils. You've got sapphire up top, correct?
Yep, so it's a slightly domed sapphire crystal with AR coating on the inside only.
Yeah, okay. And then you've got the option of the stainless steel or the FKM rubber here. And yeah, the other thing I wanted to reference just around that date window, which is the roulette, it's also framed. Again, Seiko, take note, you can do it. The minute track as well was another thing that I picked up on the website. And again, looking at it here, again, you can see that the minute track continues around the edge of the date window, so there isn't the sliver aspect of the loom hour marker there. The case back again, so we've got the diver here, and this was designed by your wife, is that correct?
Hand drawn by Danielle. She did an illustration for it, and as you pointed out quite cleverly, he is wearing a Helicon.
He's wearing a Helicon on wrist, so yeah, that's absolutely superb to see them in I was just going to say in real use. As you can say, also, she's got a very fine coin edge bezel. You notice as well how it overhangs here quite a lot. So despite the limited grip of the coin edge, you've got loads of purchase room around that. Just for those bezel nerds, have a listen. There's their action, very positive spring. Because you've got a very limited or minimalist bezel gradations as well on this one, haven't you? You haven't gone for. So I've just gone past there, looking through the camera. you haven't gone for numbers or a dive scale on this one. Is that harking back to that 62 design that you referenced?
When we talk about that 62 design, actually, what we found in a drawer in Switzerland was actually the bezels, and we almost designed the watch backward from the bezels. So we wanted to make this watch with a modern performance. So the dimensions of the watch and the case were what people found most comfortable. So you've got the case is ground up. If you look at the sides of the case as well, you actually find it's not slab sided. It slightly splays out towards your wrist, minimally. But we wanted a watch that was absolutely comfortable to wear. So that sort of case shape, which is classic, but we've just nuanced it a bit, is designed to be supremely comfortable. The bezel, as you say, is very positive. It's a ceramic bezel insert we did. So, you know, that's 2 colour ceramics that we developed with the manufacturer, inset with Swiss Luminova. And the dials, again, the dials are what we love. The dials are all hand painted by a lady called Amy. I mean, she does every one. So each one will be slightly different. And little details like the window for the date wheel, the way that the second markers go through, the indices, which are all custom designed for us. So if you look at the 12 and the 6 and the 9, they're actually molded. So it's Swiss see-through Luminova molded into an insert. You'll need a good macro lens for that, but rest assured it's there.
Just zoom in just a fraction more. That's a bit too much.
So it's like a moulding that's slid into it.
Is the dial curved as well?
No, the dial is
flat. It's just the.
But as I said, everyone's different. So the orange there is actually a sunray and a fume. So
Right.
it's smoked slightly, so it'll give you that effect. And every dial is slightly different. But this is the sort of thing that Danielle and I'm going to say Danielle will spend hours, I mean, not even hours, days. Days over indices, markers. So we want that sort of vintage look, but absolute clarity and sort of those nuances that you just notice after weeks with a watch. The other thing, you look at the polish on the hands. If I take the hands off, even the center stem of the hands, which you can't see, is highly polished. So, you know, that mirror polishing that we got on the indices and hands took a long time to refine, but actually, because we've got a great relationship with our suppliers, they know what we want. So it's all these little nuances that I'm really pleased that you're picking up.
Okay, and then you've said that this sort of blood red velvet dial was one of the most complicated to create. Why was that?
Well, we did a watch a dial like this. We call it Claret for another brand in Swiss, and it was a piece unique. They actually made two in the end. And so there's just many layers on that watch. So basically it's a combination of blacks and reds and a sunray and a lacquer finish. So there's an iridescence to it.
Yes.
So as you move it around, I mean, if you wear this watch and as you go from light to dark, it'll look pink in some lights, it'll look real almost like black in some lights. I mean, calling it a glass of wine is right. I mean, I like a nice glass of red wine, and part of my pleasure is looking at it and looking at the colours and the depth of it. So it took a lot of time to get that I'm going to say the American word, pop, in the dial, you know, and because
but it's there. It's so evidently there.
Yeah, and again, all of these dials should come alive in the light. So as I said, on the orange, you've got that lovely sort of fume effect around the edge, but it's very subtle. That actually came because each dial has a different inspiration. If you're into your guitars and you know about things like 1959 Les Pauls by Gibson, which are like very coveted, that sunburst is where that sort of idea came from. So everything's got an inspiration, and then we try and put some life into the dial with all those sort of complex finishing techniques. So even things like the Blue Hour, which is the watch with that sort of orange fade on it, there's a slight metal flake in the colour, so it almost looks like a sunset.
Well, unfortunately, it's raining here today in the Midlands, so we're not going to get many sunlight shots out here today. But yeah, no, okay. Absolutely fantastic. Well, there you go, guys. I mean, this is about as up close and personal as you can get with a brand. Massive thanks to Helicon for coming and spending some time today with us, and again to view the whole range of the watches together. For me, is absolutely fantastic. I mean, when on the website, when I looked, these were my two favourites. I just love the way that the blue is reversed from the traditional light at the top. But actually, sort of in hand, when you're looking at it, I mean, of the collection, this is the one that really stands out in person. I say apologies that we haven't got a lot of sunlight today. I will take a couple of extra shots just outside so you can see what it looks like. But yeah, it's a little bit overcast, so you can't really get the full benefit of this one. But that's absolutely beautiful. All right, we've been talking for a very long time. Hopefully everybody is still watching by the end of the video. Thanks very much indeed for your time and for your view, guys. And again, to you guys from Helicon, brilliant. Thank you so much indeed for coming and talking to us today.
Thanks for the privilege.
Cheers, guys. We'll catch you all in the next vid. Cheers.